first moment I saw you, I knew I
When I was like 10 years old, my dad brought home an old netbook. It was like an 8-inch size laptop that perfectly fit in my baby hands at that point. Now sure, the thing was dog slow and the battery barely lasted 2 hours, but it just looked so magical to me and I borrowed it every chance I got. I even tried running flash games on that netbook, and of course it did not run well. But still, I always wanted to see the day where even these netbooks could game. I was really intrigued with a project from Razer called the Razer Switchblade, promising to be a netbook that could also do gaming. Sadly though, for a very long time, everyone moved away from netbooks and only made large laptops because the technology just wasn't there to put decent hardware into such a small size. But boy, how times have changed since then. The technology finally caught up, and what I once thought was a pipe dream is now a reality. Meet the GPD Win Mini, a laptop that you can just slip into your pants pockets, and you can even do thumb typing on it. It's been my companion for the last 2 or so years, and despite its small size, it packs powerful specs that can even play full PC games. So join me as I tell you about my time with this little netbook and the things it allows me to do. I still can't believe GPD managed to fit a full x86 computer into this size. The Win Mini basically just looks like any other laptop but shrunk down to the size of an overweight Nintendo DS. And as promised, it can fit inside of your pants, given that your pockets are large enough. Every time I pull this handheld out and use it, people start talking and asking what it is. It's definitely a conversation starter. The Win Mini is made primarily of black polycarbonate with a magnesium alloy lid, but overall it feels very solidly built. The hinge has the right amount of tightness, and the sides have a bit of texture for you to grip it better. There's a good selection of I/O as well, and with 2 USB-C ports, one of them being USB 4.0. There's a microSD card slot, headphone jack, and not to mention Oculink connection that allows you to plug in external GPUs for even more gaming power. That little switch on the back works to enable direct controller output or allowing the joysticks to act as a mouse cursor. Oh, and speaking of said controller, GPD equipped this thing to the gills with input devices. Now on the PC side, you have a little backlit keyboard that reminds me of the BlackBerry keyboard, and you can thumb type on it just like an old BlackBerry. There's also a decent sized trackpad, so no need to fiddle with random knobs like the previous GPD devices. For the controller side, you get a full Xbox controller with dual Hall effect joysticks and shoulder buttons. The layout is a bit weird because it's all laid out on the line, but once your muscle memory gets used to it, it works quite well. So with a handheld this small, you do have to wonder what kind of screen they managed to put in here. Is it even usable at this size? Well, the Mini has a 7-inch IPS display at 1080p resolution, a 120Hz refresh rate, and it's also a touchscreen with fairly slim bezels. The colors, viewing angles, and sharpness are all pretty good. Not quite OLED level, but very decent for an LCD. And if you stick your eyes near it enough, it's quite usable even with Windows. Just adjust the scaling a bit. And you know me, I have a map protector on the screen as always, right? Now you can't really do a 1-finger lid opening, but you can just pry it open like a DS and it does flip to almost 90 degrees. Alright, so far so good, right? What about the specs of the Win Mini? There have been many revisions of this handheld with many chip and storage options, but I got the 2023 model running the Ryzen 7 7840U with 32 gigs of RAM and 2 terabytes for storage. Games are rendered with the built-in Radeon 780M iGPU, but do not dismiss these integrated graphics just yet because they are seriously potent and you can play a decent amount of AAA level games on here, not just indies. We'll get to that later. You can allocate a maximum of 16 gigabytes as dedicated VRAM for the iGPU, though for most cases, 8 gigs is enough. Because GPD had to maintain this smaller profile, you only have a single fan to cool all of these components, and that limits your TDP to a max of 20 watts in order to keep the Win Mini from becoming a toaster. However, you can contact GPD and get supplied with a modded BIOS that will let you essentially throw however much wattage you want at it until it blue screens itself or catches fire, who knows. Still though, in gaming use, the cooling can handle 20 watts of performance, with 25 being very toasty, and anything above that is downright sizzling hot with not a lot of extra performance to be had. The management software that GPD puts on is pretty unrefined. The UI looks like it's a prototype developer version, but it is quite functional and you can tweak a lot of parameters. Using this motion assistant, you can set the TDP for the Win Mini, disable CPU burst for power saving and more stable performance, as well as using GPD's custom-tuned GPU clock profiles. And you can customize all of that yourself too if you want to tinker with it. There are also options to enable gyroscope support for games that need it, and built-in RTSS so you can have a fairly detailed FPS overlay for your games. There's also Win Control, which further lets you map the controller buttons into keyboard macros if you just want to fully commit to a PC-like control scheme, as well as fine-tuning the actuation points of the Hall effect joysticks. But other than that, GPD doesn't really give you much else for support. You can just install a clean Windows ISO, go to their website, grab the driver package, and that's about it. GPD doesn't really handhold you through all of this, unlike products from Asus and Lenovo, but they do give enthusiasts a large degree of freedom. You can of course also install other OSs like Bazzite and SteamOS, but for me, I prefer just leaving it on Windows for the full netbook experience. But enough about that, let's see how this thing games. So at 20 watt TDP, the 7840U equipped Win Mini is quite a performer. I've been running Need for Speed Most Wanted at a very stable 60 FPS with all high settings. Racing games definitely prefer a controller, and the controllers here work quite well. You know, 10 years ago I was looking up fake YouTube tutorials on how to play Need for Speed on a smartphone, a mobile-sized device, and would you know it, now it's actually real. Armored Core 6 also plays nice, all at high settings without ray tracing. You just have to set the resolution to 720p. That being said, the small 7-inch screen means that you don't really notice the low render resolution, and for most games, sticking to 720p is not as bad a compromise as you'd think. Now excuse my bad gameplay because it's very hard to play whilst having to man the camera, but if you crank the TDP to 30 watts, you can play Arknight's Enfield at medium settings. However, again, it's 720p and it's also 60% render scale. That's a lot of compromises, and at these settings, Enfield on PC doesn't really look better than just playing on a phone, so stick with a phone for this one. Alright, we've played some pretty intensive games. How about something more chill, something that you can run with lower power settings and you can play it without being plugged in? I spent like half a summer playing Dave the Diver on the Win Mini, and you can pretty much play it smoothly at about 12 to 15 watts. You can even get it down to 10 or 8 if you really wanted to. This gives you about 2 to 3 hours of runtime on a fresh battery, though on my worn battery, it's more like an hour and a half. The thing is, although I bought the Win Mini expecting to game a lot, and I kind of want to treat it like a Nintendo DS that just happens to run all the PC games I want, I ended up using it more like just a netbook, like what I did back in 2010. When I was in college, I would bring the Win Mini alongside this compact fold-out keyboard that includes a trackpad to the side, and I put it all in a small bag. And I can pretty much take all the notes I wanted, even if I had to squint a lot. it certainly made strong impressions on any professors that saw me using this, that's for sure. For my audio reviews, I've also enjoyed using the Win Mini as like a portable measuring station alongside my 7-Eleven clone coupler. Pretty much anything you would need from a laptop, the Win Mini can provide, just in a small 7-inch sized package. So there's much more to this than just being a gaming machine, hence why I treat it more like a netbook than anything else. Obviously, with a small machine like this, battery life is not gonna be the greatest. However, the efficiency of the 7840U is not to be underestimated. And at 10 watt TDP, I can get like 5.5 hours out of this little thing doing like basic web browsing, typing out documents. So far, I'd say most of my use cases have been very well covered by this little machine. That being said, the Win Mini certainly isn't perfect. Early prototypes of this handheld had extreme overheating issues, and it will come to the point where it got hot enough to burn your hands whilst gaming. Now GPD somewhat rectifies this with a textured surface on the sides to reduce heat transfer to your skin, and they also sell some extra 3D printed grip parts to aid with ergonomics and trying to separate you from the thermals. But even so, the Win Mini can get very toasty at higher TDPs, and it definitely felt uncomfortable holding this thing for longer gaming sessions. My other gripes mostly have to do with Windows itself. Sleep is basically broken on these handhelds. I just have to turn it off when I don't want to use it anymore, because sleep just would not work properly. I've had occasions where I close the lid, I think the Win Mini was already asleep, pack it in my bag, only to open it later and see the battery drained and the computer is piping hot. You can see it now, the fans are still spinning in here. Windows 11 also famously pushes updates even without your permission, and one of those updates actually bricked my Wi-Fi. Nothing I did would fix it. Reinstalling drivers, doing a system restore, nothing worked. Eventually, I just gave up and I reinstalled Windows. I mean, it did fix the issue, but it happened on a test week, and that lost me like a whole day of work. If you just want a game, probably install SteamOS or Bazite on here. Now, as much as I love the Win Mini and its form factor, I will have to sell it away soon. The reason being, my day job just requires a different type of device to suit my work. Back in my college days, I could pretty much bring anything I want and it could work. But now, when I'm juggling a lot of different tabs and programs, I find myself needing a proper laptop screen in order to do all of the multi-window activities. Which the Win Mini, well, with its small screen, you know, it can't really provide on that front. There's also the matter of how you appear using these devices. Although I'm happy that the Win Mini got me a lot of attention, for a work environment, it's just not the kind of attention that I need. I kind of have to get like the opposite of a Win Mini. Something that looks conventional, it doesn't attract curious onlookers, and so, yeah, the Win Mini's gonna have to be sold off. And man, I'm certainly gonna miss it. Maybe one day I'll come back, but today, I bid adieu to an old friend. Join my Patreon for extra product photography and thumbnails of these videos, and get my image presets, which aim to give the stale photos of modern digital cameras some vintage vibes and a bit more personality. I am also releasing a new preset that helps complement and really bring out the characters of your old digicam. So if you have an old digital camera, you want a nice preset, a punchy one, go to my Patreon, grab it, and tell me about your results. Join the channel members to get early access to videos just like these, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.